Luffy is moments away from death. The Holy Knights have been powered up, Scopper is squaring up with Emu, and overall, I just do not really like the Straw Hats' chances here too much because this arc has been shaping up to be exactly what I wanted, the crew's biggest loss since Sabaody Archipelago, which is super convenient because that's the arc that Elbaph parallels by far the most. And I really think it's possible for us to figure out here how things might actually play out going forward because we've seen this pattern before. If Elbaph is gonna be the Sabaody of the post-Timeskip saga, then what are the parallels between these two arcs? What's the same and how will things be actually different this time around? And what from Sabaody has yet to happen in Elbaph that will help us speculate a little bit on how Elbaph will actually wrap up and what's gonna happen with Luffy, Emu, and co. Now, for starters, my man, Scopper Gaban has stepped in and is squaring up against the king of the world. And I gotta say, guys, I'm a little bit worried here. Obviously, this calls back to when Rayleigh defended the crew from Kizaru back on Sabaody Archipelago, but this arc also echoes the events leading up to it because back on Sabaody was the first time that we ever learned about the Celestial Dragons existing in the story altogether and their status as the true rulers of the world. And of course, at the slave auction, after St. Charlos shot Hachan, Luffy delivered one of the most satisfying punches in manga history. The only problem was that a celestial dragon getting hurt meant calling in an admiral immediately, and at that point in the story, as we all know, Luffy was just not even close to be ready for that heat. Like, he didn't even have Haki yet at that point. There was nothing he could ever do against the powers of a Logia fruit user, especially one belonging to a Marine Admiral. But you know who absolutely could? The Dark King Silver's Rayleigh, the right-hand man of the Pirate King who held Kizaru at bay while Kuma managed to get all of the Straw Hats off the islands. So by that standard alone, as you know, Elbaph is playing out in a very similar fashion here, but it's not a one-to-one recreation, of course, as it never is with Oda's parallels. It's more of a remix of sorts, as Oda always loves to do, take something pre-Timeskip, repeat it post-Timeskip, but make it a little bit different and give it a twist. While Sabaody was where the crew first learned about celestial dragons, this here is where they're learning about the one who's even higher above those guys, the secret king of the world that's not to be existent, and his Holy Knights. And Luffy just jumped into the fight with Emu, delivering a very similar punch to the one that he gave to Charlos, but this time the Celestial Dragon doesn't even need to call for backup.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
Emu is the backup. This is a world noble who can defend himself and can crush Luffy easily, and the keys to defeating him and the Holy Knights are just as mysterious as the key to overcoming Logias back before the Timeskip war as well. It's absolutely unclear exactly how we're gonna able to be bypassing their powers of immortality and their regeneration and everything else, and the key to being able to hit Kizaru, of course, was Haki back in the day, but we wouldn't even get the full Haki breakdown until the next arc, which was Amazon Lily. Like, I'm just thinking about how crazy that period of time actually was back in the day because people were really out there saying that Rayleigh's sandals and his sword must have been coated in like sea stone and that's how he was able to block Kizaru's attacks. Different time, very fun either way. But other than having something to do with Conqueror's Haki and improving Luffy's Gear 5 capabilities, it's just also as unclear how to permanently defeat Emu and the Holy Knights right now in Elbaph, which is of course why in the next arc we're probably gonna start uncovering those very secrets, but right now, it's happening! Scopper versus Emu. 2 axes and a dream versus the legendary Xintiang axe, one of the 19 swords of the, kings who actually formed the world government, so he's totally gonna die, right? Isn't he? I mean, I get that Oda does not like to kill characters very often, but if it's ever gonna happen, it's gonna be right here, right? I mean, he's showing up here just like Rayleigh did. I mean, Emu is actively about to kill our main character. This time it's actually Luffy. With Kizaru, it was actually Zoro, but He gets there just in the nick of time to block the attack and then stop the Admiral from just pursuing the Straw Hats as they try to escape, or I guess they're being escaped. But that was an Admiral. And this is Imu. And while Scopper had no problem going up against any of the Holy Knights, as we know, Imu is on a completely different level. He might be able to trade a few blows here and there, just like Luffy and Loki were able to do, but the wings of the former Pirate King just aren't what they used to be, and even Rayleigh said himself that he probably couldn't take someone like Blackbeard in his old age. How are he and Scopper supposed to be any match for Imu right now? At the very best, unless he knows some crazy secret, Scopper will be able to hold off Imu a little bit until one of a few things happen here. The Straw Hats could escape, but right now they're in no position to do so. Where are they supposed to go with their ship on the other side of the island, and Zoro and Sanji actively fighting Summer and killing him, by the way? And it's not like any of them are the type to just give up on Elbaph and the Giants and then just let all of them get enslaved and get the freak out of here. That's not really the Straw Hat way. Now, Scopper could also just be able to hold out here barely until Imu's apparent time limit gives out and he has to retreat back to Marijua. Assuming, of course, that Imu does actually have a time limit here in Elbaph. That's kind of an assumption we've all been running with based on the Gorosei being worried about him heading out to Marijua and, the entire coughing up blood thing, which probably isn't healthy. I don't know, I'm not a doctor. But we don't know for sure that Imu has a hard time limit. He might just not. Really, he hasn't been coughing all that much since that moment where he transformed, so I'm kind of starting to suspect that there might be some other reason for the Gorosei's concern. Maybe it's just assuming this shape from his normal ink blob crazy, the parrot shape basically, that's actually causing him, the damage here. The last option is that, unlike last time, there is no one currently on Elbaph who can save the Straw Hats, but there might be someone who isn't on the island who could show up now and save them instead. So, if anyone, who could be the Deus Ex Machina that gets the Straw Hats off of Elbaph and into a much-needed training arc? The most obvious answer would probably be my boy Shanks. He hangs around on Elbaph a lot as is. He's connected to so many of the characters here. He was on Scopper's crew, he chained up Loki, he served under Imu as a temporary Holy Knight. But to me, it doesn't feel really like it's quite time for Luffy and him to reunite, and he was just on Elbaph, so I'm not sure why he just returned so soon, unless someone was able to get in touch with him off panel and tip him off. I guess you could make the point that Luffy might just be unconscious once again, like during the main war at Marineford, and technically doesn't count as meeting Shanks, but still feels like not 100% right. Now, of course, that could also be a surprise appearance by someone like Dragon or Blackbeard if either of them somehow know that Imu himself or a small group of Holy Knights are away from Marijua on Elbaph right now. Would be a pretty perfect opportunity to strike, away from all the other forces. Obviously, we know that Dragon wants to topple the world government as a revolutionary, and Blackbeard seems to want to claim the throne just for himself, so if they had a chance to now pick off a few of the Holy Knights, or even the big dog himself while away from most of his major forces, they'd probably try and take it. But I'm also not sure how they'd know what's going on Elbaph right now either, unless there's a spy somewhere, which could always be the case, but nothing has been hinted at that being the case right now. But as far as saving the Straw Hat goes, I didn't think that Scopper is that guy. I love him, he's my man, but against Imu, I don't know, I just don't really feel like he's that strong. I have a feeling that this could be a subversion of Sabaody. There, Rayleigh was apparently easily able to fend off their attacker, even though, he probably would have still lost over a longer confrontation with Kizaru. And then later on, he of course became Luffy's mentor. Scopper has been set up as becoming a new mentor for the Straw Hats, but he could straight up just die here. It would kind of turn Elbaph into a loss like Sabaody, but 1,000 times worse. He can sacrifice himself in an attempt to save the island that he's grown to call home now, right? Like Oda, just to kind of rub it really in. His child and wife are here right now on the island that need protecting too. A part of me kind of just wants this to happen to a certain degree, even though I'm loving Scopper and waited years to finally see him in the story, and I would still really love him teaching the Straw Hats. But that's also exactly why it would be so painful and why it would give the Straw Hats a more personal reason to actually get stronger and overcome Imu and the Holy Knights. I don't know how you feel about that. But it might not happen. I mean, like I said, Oda is usually hesitant to kill off characters, period, as we know. He's definitely killed characters more often in the post-Timeskip, but I mean, if Kinemon somehow made it out of Wano and Vegapunk has like a new body, or 5 I guess, waiting for him, I could see Scopper surviving, especially since he's been sort of teased as this new mentor figure for training Zoro and Sanji in Conqueror's Haki, maybe also Luffy. Either way though, Scopper might not make it out of this. If Elbaph is supposed to be the final saga's version of a Sabaody Archipelago defeat, it needs to be even more devastating and heartbreaking than last time. And while Sabaody was already the worst loss that the Straw had suffered up to that point, I kind of fear that it can get so much worse. And that means that things are looking really bad for my man, the Mountain Eater. Also, I gotta say, things aren't looking too hot either for another character with a ton of Sabaody parallels. My boy Loki here, who is basically playing the role, I guess, of all the supernova. Like, really think about it. This is a character we didn't really know all that much about before, only a few name drops here and there, who acts as a direct rival to Luffy and is roughly seeming to match him in pure power level as well. The supernova back in the day were of course also stomped by Kizaru, like Loki was just being beaten by Imu. And I mean, Luffy thought that Loki was straight up dead, though he might not be totally down for the count yet, I think. But now that he's unchained from that tree, he's about to be let loose on the new world, just like the supernova were, of course, after Sabaody. And he's kind of got the same antagonistic rivalry with Luffy that someone like Eustace Kid, for example, had. He's also a keeper of some of that deep sun god lore, it seems. Like, I kind of also suspect the mad monk Urouge is. He's got pink hair, like Bonnie, but really, like, that's not the point I'm trying to make. It's a lot less about connecting his qualities to every single supernova and much more about what both the supernova and Loki represent in the story, and it's especially about what Loki's gonna do next, of course. Because what did all the supernova do after Sabaody? Well, if he's anything like Law, he might do exactly what I've been hoping he would do after, like, we met him for the first time, that he might ally with the Straw Hats. Personally, as you know, I would love for Loki to just straight up join the crew, and I'm just loving Luffy and Loki's chemistry together. They're instant besties, but I do also kind of worry that Oda's gonna pull another Yamato move again and just shatter my dreams of a new Straw Hat by not having him come sail at all after this arc. But there are a couple of other options here as well. For starters, the majority of the supernova actually ended up joining one of the existing Yonko, even though a few were secretly trying to take them down from within. Apu, Hawkins, and Diaz Drake joined Kaido's forces, Capone Beige joined Big Mom, but none of them ended up joining forces with Blackbeard or Shanks. So if not joining Luffy, I could see a world where it's possible at least for Loki to become a member of Blackbeard's crew. After all, Teach is the son of Loki's old idol, Davy D. Zebek. Zebek was homies with Loki's father, Harold, as well, right? So what if the sons of these legends actually ended up teaming up and there was no bond with Luffy here? It might kind of make perfect sense too, thinking about Rox's plan to find those two very particular devil fruits, one of which seems to have been the Nidhogg fruit, Elbaph's national treasure, and the other of which could have been the Darkness fruit, seeing as how Teach has spent literal decades tracking it down and wanting that one fruit specifically. Also, assuming that Aokiji isn't going to stay aligned with Blackbeard forever, he might have a position open up on the Titanic captain sometimes as well, and truly, no captain would be more Titanic than the Nidhogg, except maybe San Juan Wolf. That dude's also really big. Kind of hard to say who's bigger. Who do you think is bigger? Like Nidhogg Loki or San Juan Wolf? I don't know. I hope Loki, but it's not clear. Either way, doesn't matter. I could also see Loki pulling a Eustace Kid and just stepping up to Shanks again. Kid's done this twice now. First was off screen when he lost his arm, and then more recently where he tried to attack Elbaph and got absolutely one-shot by Shanks. I don't know, maybe Kid's gonna show up and fight Imu with Luffy, but I kinda don't want that to happen. Meanwhile, Loki has of course every reason to confront Shanks. He was the one who chained him up to the Atom Tree for all those years, and the first time that Loki meets Luffy, he calls Shanks a coward, and it might be the case that he wants revenge. But also, knowing everything we know now, with everything that Shanks revealed to Loki about Imu and the Holy Knights, it could also be more likely that Loki understands why Shanks needed to prevent him from just charging into Morijoa solo as well. And he might also just have realized that if there's anyone that he and Luffy need on their side, if they're gonna try and take the battle back to Imu at some point, it's gonna be Shanks. He was the man who infiltrated the Holy Land as a temporary Holy Knight after all. He will know way more about their enemy than just about anyone possibly out there that is at least willing to cooperate with them, right? So Loki might want to join forces with the Red Hair Pirates so that they can take on Imu and the other Figure Lands together, especially after Loki's encounter with Shamrock. Remember that? Or potentially, it's none of the above. I mean, Loki's been on a lot of phone calls with like his Mosa character, who is just very heavily implied to be Shirahoshi. Armed with knowledge of the Sun God, he could travel around the world to places like Fishman Island, working to build up the forces of the Sun God's army for the final war as well. And while Luffy and the crew search for the crucial fourth poneglyph, Loki could be the one to travel around to the places that they visited in the past, like Wano and Dressrosa, gathering capable fighters for an all-out attack on the world government. But a lot of that also depends on the fate of the Straw Hat crew after this battle. This is the next big point, because the crew's time on Elbaph actually also closely paralleled Sabaody. Back then, it also started out all fun and games. They were super excited to see all their old giant butts and had a great time exploring the island. In the same way, Sabaody saw them checking out the amusement park, reuniting with Hachi, befriending a wing of the Pirate King, and then everything hit the fan. Also, I want to point out that both during Sabaody and now during Elbaph, the crew arrived being kind of in way too high spirits, feeling absolutely undefeatable, right? Like Luffy had just taken down 2 warlords with Crocodile and then Moria. Then earlier, Luffy had just taken down, he had kind of defeated Kizaru, he had defeated Kaido, helped defeat Big Mom, coming from like this undefeatable, this is my peak kind of vibe, and then being absolutely schooled. Now that being said, things are a little bit different this time, as again, they don't need to parallel each other one-to-one. Now the crew can actually hold their own a lot better than they could, of course, before the time skip. I mean, it took the entire crew working together to take down a single Pacifista back on Sabaody. The crew is, of course, in comparison, like astronomically stronger now. The Holy Knights, the top forces of the world government, descended on Elbaph, but they were no real match for the Straw Hats compared to the Pacifista. Even with their immortality, they were getting chopped to bits and pieces and being tied up. It really wasn't until Imu showed up and gave them the Omen boost that they became true threats that are probably stronger right now than the Straw Hats. And honestly, the Holy Knights do kind of remind me of the Pacifista anyways. I mean, first off, there's Summer's mechanical heart. There's some weird cyborg thing going on there that I'm still not sure what to make of. It also looks like the weird valve that like the robot beings on the moon had, of the space pirates that Enel was fighting. But Pacifista are machines made to carry out the will of the government, and through the Holy Knights' covenants, they're forced to obey Imu's will, like we saw with Harold, who was unable to disobey any of Imu's commands. The Knights certainly have more agencies than a literal cyborg robot that has been robbed of his humanity, but I really can't help but draw some kind of parallel here anyways. And of course, they also have a little bit of a Sentomaru thrown in there too, because Sentomaru was always claiming to have the greatest defense in the entire world. Meanwhile, you could also make the argument that the Holy Knights have the actual greatest defense with their mortality and regeneration abilities, right? But it also almost really feels here like Oda setting up the crew's role to be the opposite of what it was on Sabaody. Luffy watched his crew get swept away one by one, and there was absolutely nothing that he could do to stop it. But now, Usopp has recognized that Luffy's in some serious trouble. Now their captain is the one whose life is on the line, but the crew is powerless against Imu, and he already has beaten both Zoro and Sanji in one attack each. So honestly, it really just feels like Elbaph is shaping up to be One Piece's greatest tragedy. I honestly thought it would come a lot sooner. Much like Mr. Morch, I thought that there was a possibility of the raid on Onigashima failing. Way back in the day, ooh boy, what a blast from the past. And on Elbaph, I was getting major Sabaody vibes already, with Kizaru being there, especially once the Gorosei showed up. but then everyone kind of managed to escape the island just fine, kind of like what happened on Thriller Bark with Kuma presumably, where they just got away from being completely whooped there. But now it is finally time for the Straw Hats to lose, right? Because while they had basically zero agency on Sabaody, there are things the crew can actually do here. Zoro and Sanji still have a fighting chance against their very tough opponents, though now that Summers and Killingham just got their weapons from Imu in addition to all the crazy Omen boost powers, it's kind of looking worse and worse here too. But the crew overall still might be able to save the giant children and keep Elbaph relatively safe here. And the biggest hope for this could be with the rest of the crew and their current task, which is saving Princess Shuri, because she's actually one of a few select characters who can prevent a total defeat here and allow the Straw Hats to actually fight another day after hopefully another time skip. Back on Egghead Island, the crew was really only able to get away from the Gorosei's crazy demon forms thanks to Emmet. On Sabaody, it was thanks to Kuma. And of course, Kuma is on the island right now, so there's a world where he just wakes up and could get them off the island just like he did on Sabaody. Kuma still coming in clutch potentially, but assuming that Kuma stays unconscious here, how are they possibly gonna escape here? We already talked about the surprise visit potential from like Shanks, Dragon, Blackbeard pulling up to save the day, but working with the pieces that we actually currently have on the board, who do we actually have? Again, Eustace Kid re-emerging out of the ocean, Bonnie coming in clutch and de-aging Imu here, Vegapunk pulling out some crazy super science like with Lilith. The Giants actually doing something? Unlikely, since even Loki was beaten here. It is possible, of course, that the Holy Knights having a traitor could be what helps out the Straw Hats here, because that's precisely what happened on Sabaody, right? Kuma, the warlord, actually betrayed the world government in order to save Luffy, Dragon's son, and the next sun god Nika, the savior that Kuma had always been praying to. And with all that in mind, I feel like Shuri could actually be the key here. If Brook manages to actually wake her up and she's restoring her memories, which seems to be what the entire Brook flashback seems to have been setting up, I hope you agree, she might be able to take some advantage of the connection that she has to Imu clearly to either force him back to Marijua or otherwise buy some time at least for the Straw Hats to escape here. It could even be some heroic self-sacrifice situation, since we do know that a Holy Knight dying causes some damage to Imu directly. We saw that happen when Loki killed Herald in the flashback, for instance, right? So Shuri could finally wake up just to have a tragic goodbye moment with Brook before sacrificing herself to force Imu back to the Holy Land, maybe? It would be kind of a beautiful moment, because early in the arc, Gunko talked about how she feared the sun god Nika. In all her time in the Holy Land, this fear of Nika has probably been fully instilled in her, so it would be kind of a nice, wonderful moment if she could regain her free will and freedom, and in one last act of defiance and liberation, save the very god that the Celestial Dragons fear the most. Or she survives and maybe even sails with the crew for a little while. Who knows? I'm really not sure how this all is going to play out. On the one hand, the Straw Hats could somehow escape, leaving Elbaph enslaved by Imu, like kind of fulfilling what Imu's plan was. That would also kind of mean, though, whatever distracts Imu has to be long and good enough for the Straw Hats to all reunite, get Luffy, get him like off that tree, and then get back to the ship and get out of here. But I don't really see them just abandoning all their giant friends on the island as well, like none of them. On the other hand, Imu could just be forced to leave here, temporarily saving the day, but once the Straw Hats continue to travel, the Island of Giants just remains in danger, right? The Holy Knights could easily just come back once Luffy moves on to something else. So really, regardless of how the Straw Hats manage to escape here, no matter how this arc comes to its conclusion, I might be most excited about what's gonna happen after Elbaph, because while we're so focused on the island right now, all the other major players are already making moves in the background. I mean, during Sabaody Archipelago, Luffy was blissfully unaware that Ace had been captured by Blackbeard already and that his execution was already being scheduled. All the dominoes leading to the Marineford War and the time skip were already being put in place without him realizing it. And right now, there are just so many things going on behind the scenes in the outside world as well. Something was happening up in the Holy Land. My guess would be that it's either the revolutionaries or possibly even Blackbeard behind it. Garp's been captured and imprisoned at Hachinosu by Blackbeard. support, Bippo carried Law off to who knows where, the Cross Guild and Shanks are making their moves for the One Piece too. Whatever happens next is gonna be really big and might just become its own little arc. Think about Amazon Lily, but post Timeskip. Like, I've been imagining that we could get a training arc here, hopefully, but are we even getting a training arc right away, or will this follow again the same Sabaody pattern, with things kind of leading one right into another without the crew ever having a real chance to stop and train? Again, back then we had Amazon Lily leading into Impel Down, leading into Marineford without ever really taking a break. Of course, these were special because they were Luffy solo arcs, which could be fun again. Are we just gonna jump into the final war immediately here? Or possibly could Luffy get kidnapped here and then the rest of the crew is gonna have to storm Arisia to get him out? That would essentially make him the new ace figure of the final saga that everyone wants to save so badly. Ideally though, I do want to see a training arc and maybe even another little time skip, because it just kind of seems like Luffy and the gang are nowhere near strong enough right now to take on Imu. By the way, did you realize also that the 2-year time skip is longer than the rest of One Piece together? I recently did a whole video on like mapping out the timeline of Luffy's journey day by day. You can check that out on my new channel, Lucia, where I'm doing some evergreen, more explainer style videos again, if you need some recap of some One Piece lore, stuff like that. But anyways, what purpose would this new time skip even serve, right? Luffy needs to unlock the full potential of the Nika fruit, for starters. He still doesn't know he even has a zone fruit. The crew needs to learn how to overcome the Holy Knight's powers of immortality and regeneration, likely by training their Conqueror's Haki. Though I could even envision a sick time skip transition like in Attack on Titan, where we fast forward in time to see some action from the middle of the final war. We just get to see some glimpses of the final battle, maybe some sick new post-time skip character designs, only to then backtrack and fill in the gaps of what happened later. That could be fun, some out-of-sequence storytelling. But I've also got a lot of thoughts on what another time skip or training arc could look like. Like, who's gonna teach the Straw Hats and Luffy? What will they learn? Where will they learn it? Right? We've got some ideas, and they're all in this video right here, talking about what might happen next. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching. New chapter this week. Ooh, and I've got some other cool stuff planned. The Thursday video I'm a little bit nervous about. I hope you like it. It's a little bit more serious than normal. Otherwise, have a great week.